Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning here in Regina, as well as those of you who are connecting with us through our webinar. My name is Peter Federico, and I'm the CEO of the Workers' Compensation Board, and it's my pleasure to share some information with you here this morning. We have a bit of an agenda for this morning, so just some introductory comments, and then we'll take you through the rate setting process and try and shed some light on the setting of premium rates and the impacts of moving to the enhanced rate making model, which took effect January 1st of 2018. So what for further clarity, I guess, what we're going to do here this morning is we're not sharing with you anything to do with the 2019 premium rates, but rather shedding some light on the impacts of moving to the enhanced model and the transition program that we have adopted to allow time for industry to prepare for what might be coming in 2019. So we'll show you a glimpse of the rate making process itself. We will then show you a comparison of what the 2018 rates would have been had we stuck with the existing model compared to what the rates are with the enhanced model, provide some explanation as to what elements of the enhanced model contributed to rate increases in your industry, and then open it up for questions. So I anticipate that I'll be speaking to you for about the first hour, and then we'll reserve the second hour for questions. So those of you that are here with us in person this morning, there should be question cards on the table. I would ask that you record your questions and save them until the end. Those of you who are joining us online, you can submit your questions to us online through askwcb@wcbsask.com. So what do premiums cover? So from the worker's perspective, the collection of premiums ensures that you are insured against the impacts of a workplace injury. So we collect sufficient premiums to ensure that we can provide you with wage loss benefits, medical benefits, and rehabilitation benefits associated with your workplace injury. From the employer's perspective, employers, I guess, really benefit two ways. One, they're provided assurance that their workers are in fact provided with coverage, and secondly, they're provided with assurance that they are protected from any lawsuit that otherwise might arise as a result of the workplace injury. So what drives premium rates, and what are we attempting to do as we establish premium rates? Really, the ultimate goal in establishing premium rates for a given year is to ensure that we collect sufficient revenue to cover the current and future costs of all claims that would occur in that year. So for 2018, the premium rates we're collecting for 2018 would be there to cover all current costs and future costs of injuries that would occur in 2018. So we collect all of that money up front, invest it through our investment portfolio, and continue to pay whatever benefits might be necessary in 2018 and for years after that. Those benefits can last up to 50 years. If we were to have a young worker, age 15, seriously injured, who had permanent loss of earning capacity, they could collect benefits for up to 50 years until age 65. So our objective in setting those premium rates is to ensure that we collect sufficient funds in order to pay for all of those costs for the entire duration of that claim, so that employers of today are the ones that are responsible for the costs of injuries that occur today, and those costs are not passed on to any future employers. The calculation of the premium rate is really quite simple. We go through estimating the claims costs for the coming year, and I will explain in greater detail how we go about doing that. We then get payroll information from employers and other sources, and the premium rate is simply a mathematical calculation, which is the estimated claims costs divided by the projected payroll, and that provides us with the premium rate. The WCB is entirely funded by employer premiums and any investment earnings that we generate off of those premiums. So as I mentioned, for 2018, we are collecting all of the premiums up front to pay for current and future costs associated with claims in 2018. We will not spend all of that money in 2018. We invest those dollars through our investment portfolio, which is managed by external investment managers, and the returns on that investment combined with the premium that we collect is sufficient to pay future claims costs. The actuarial model that we use is really there to estimate, to predict what our future costs are going to be. Again, an important element in the calculation of premium rates are the claims costs associated with the injuries of the current year, as well as the payroll amount, and the actuarial rate model is the vehicle that we use to actually project what those future costs will be. So our journey with respect to implementation of the enhanced rate model actually began back in 2015, where as part of our overall review of our financial system, we engaged an external actuary to conduct an asset liability study. And the study incorporated both the actuarial liability on the benefit side as well as the investment return projections on the revenue side. In the spring of 2018, we started that review. In the fall of 2016, as part of our regular rate setting consultation process, we introduced the enhanced model to employers. In November and December, we conducted province-wide educational centers in various cities across Saskatchewan to provide general information about the proposed changes to the enhanced model. In 2017, so just last year, throughout February and March, we conducted industry rate code employer educational sessions and consultation on what we were proposing in terms of the transition plan. In October of 2017, again, as part of our regular rate setting consultations, we communicated with employers what the 2018 premium rates would be and what the rate model transition decision was taken by the board. In 2018, January 2018, the new model was introduced and implemented together with the transition plan. Throughout this journey, we've conducted in excess of 20 meetings with various employer and stakeholder groups to provide information and education around the whys of the changes to the rate-making model and the potential impacts. Those presentations continue to be online, so you can access those through our YouTube channel or our wcbsask.com website to get further detail that was provided throughout this period of time. So today I'm not going to do a very deep dive into the elements of the enhanced model, but rather a higher level review. If you are interested in more detailed information, of course, we would refer you to our YouTube videos or our WCB website, or would be prepared to engage with you and your particular stakeholder groups to further explain all of the ins and outs. So the fundamental principles that we try and incorporate into the rate-making model are really what some would see as often competing principles. So on the one hand, we know that all insurance programs, WCB not excluded, have this element of collective liability. So if we think about our own insurance with respect to our vehicles or our homes, we are placed in risk pools together with other homeowners or car owners based on perhaps the make of the model that we are driving, the construction of our house, whether we have wood burning as opposed to gas-fired fireplaces, the construction of the basement, and so on and so forth. So all of us, through all of our insurance programs, are placed into classes or risk pools. And the premium that we pay is based on the collective experience of everybody who's in that risk pool. That concept of collective liability is fundamental to the insurance programs. Otherwise, what we would end up doing in the event of an insurance claim on our vehicle or on our home, we'd have to dig into our pockets and come up with the full replacement cost of the vehicle or the home. Collectively, employers and or the insured through our home or vehicle policies share in the liabilities associated with all claims in that pool, so that all we're paying is the annual premium, and for that we receive full coverage. Balancing that against the accountability piece though. So one of the principles that we want to maintain within our rate-making model is holding employers who have greater use of the system more accountable for the costs within their industry, and balance that against this concept of collective liability. If we increase the accountability to a very, very large extent, we totally deplete the concept of collective liability, because now you're bearing a greater portion or 100% of the costs. If we overly put influence on the collective liability, we reduce the accountability. So as we proceeded with enhancing our rate model, we were very, very conscious of the need to keep those two principles in balance. On the other hand, the other two principles have to do with rate stability versus rate reactivity. So employers have told us over the years, and of course as an insured person myself, don't really appreciate when rates bounce all over the place. We want relative stability, predictability in what those premium rates might be, so that we in any given year, we don't experience significant rate shock, only to be followed by significant reductions in the subsequent year. On the other hand, the model cannot be so slow to react to current situations that we never account for the actual experience that's happening in the most recent claim period. So again, balancing the need for the model to react to changing patterns in insurance claims against the principle of providing rate stability. So those four principles, combined with the need for this to be very, very transparent, relatively easy to understand and explain, is what we paid particular attention to as we addressed the need to enhance our rate-making model. So what were the components, or what are the components that went into the rate-making model? So the first one the actuary addressed, which the board accepted and endorsed, was this concept of credibility of industries. So in Saskatchewan, we have many businesses that employ fewer than 10 people, very, very small. And the combination, even the combination of those within their collective pool is very, very small. And so the volatility that can occur from very few claims, one very, very serious injury that would have significant claims attached to it, could cause significant volatility in the premium rates of those particular rate codes, because they simply don't have enough of a base, they're not credible enough to sustain sudden shifts. Under the old model, we used to define credibility on the basis of payroll through kind of a convoluted formula. The actuary looked at that and said, first of all, you should not be basing the credibility on the basis of payroll. You should actually look at the costs that flow through. So under our enhanced model, if an industry rate code has, over the review period, so generally speaking 5 years, if an industry has $16.5 million of claims costs flowing through it in that 5-year period, they would be considered to be 100% credible, which means that past experience is very reliable in predicting future experience. It's really what the essence of credibility is the extent to which you can rely on past experience to predict future experience. If a rate code, by way of example, has only $10 million, they would be considered to be 60% credible. So only 60% reliability could be placed on the last 5 years of claims cost experience in predicting what the next 50 years of claims experience might be. The actuary suggested that, so under the old model, what we used to do in order to deal with the credibility issues, when we had small industry groups, we would actually blend the industry experience with the overall board experience. And what I mean by the overall board experience is the experience of all the rate codes insured by the Workers' Compensation Board. So we have divided industry into 50 individual industry rate codes, grouping similar businesses, similar companies with the same industrial undertaking together. So when we set, fundamentally what the actuary found when he reviewed the rate model is when you look at the rate established for all 50 rate codes put together, the model functioned very, very well. Where it broke down was the way that premium was distributed among the various industry codes for various reasons, credibility being one of them. So in order to mitigate the impacts of non-credible, volatile industry groups, we used to take the experience of all 50 industry rate codes and we would blend that with the individual industry rate code. Actuary said you shouldn't do that because that really deteriorates from the accountability aspect, not holding that industry accountable. What you should do is when an industry is not fully credible, you should take the last 5 years of claims experience and blend that, complement that with the 10-year experience. And that will provide you with greater credibility and reliability in terms of the predictability of future costs. So in my example, if we have an industry code that has $10 million of claims costs going through it, they would consider to be 60% credible. So what we would do in establishing the future claims costs is we would take 60% of the average of their 5 years claims cost experience and we would blend that with 40% of their 10-year cost experience. And that would then give us the base from which we would step off of in terms of establishing the future spending pattern, future claims costs. The use of indicators to predict costs. Oh, the other thing I should mention in the credibility piece is as the actuary went through the rate model, he also noticed that we had two different sets of assumptions with respect to claims costs. So what we were doing is we were using the last 5 years of claims experience for all benefit types except medical costs. Medical costs, we were only using the last 3 years of claims cost experience. The actuary said you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't differentiate among the benefit types. So under the enhanced model, all claims costs now are looked at within that 5 or 10-year frame, depending on the level of credibility of the industry. So our ability to predict future costs was the other element that the actuary looked at. And under the existing or old model, what we would do is we would actually look at, as I mentioned, we would look at the 5 years of claims cost experience and we would adjust that for changes in the frequency. So we would look at things like injury rates, and if injury rates were going down, what we would do is we would adjust that claims cost experience to predict a future further decline in claims cost experience moving forward. If injuries were increasing, injury rates were increasing, we may adjust those costs going up. The actuary did a study, and what they determined is in recent years, with the dramatic declines in the number of claims and injury rates, there was no longer a correlation between declining injury rates and claims costs. As a matter of fact, there was an inverse relationship. So injury rates were declining quite significantly, but at the same time, claims costs were increasing. So the actuary determined that this is no longer a reliable way of predicting future costs, and you shouldn't use injury frequency as a predictor of future costs, but rather what you should use is the change in workforce. So under the enhanced model, we look to the changes in the number of workers insured within a particular industry code. So if we see a 3%, by way of example, a 3% increase, in the workforce within a particular industry code. We would take that 5 and 10 year claims cost experience and we would increase it by that 3% growth in the workforce. Under the old model, in order to mitigate what we were seeing in terms of the lack of correlation between declining injury rates and increasing claims costs, we were averaging premium rates. So we would calculate the premium rate for the insuring year, and we would average that with the premium rate from the prior year. The actuary said that was just a band-aid to try and mitigate the impacts of the volatility and the lack of correlation between injury rates and costs. You shouldn't do that anymore. So under the enhanced model, we are no longer averaging premium rates, and we are using the change in the workforce to actually predict what the future costs will be, no longer looking at injury frequency. Costly claim pooling. So again, this relates to the collective liability concept. So under the old model, any long-term earnings replacement or pension claims had their costs capped at $90,000. That $90,000 had been in place for a number of years and had never ever been adjusted for changes in costs. The actuary said, first of all, well, that's not a good thing because clearly what's happened with claims costs is they have changed, they have increased, and you've held your cap, claims cost cap, flat at $90,000. Secondly, you're only applying it to pension claims or the long-term earning replacement claims. And thirdly, you're pooling the difference only at the class level. So let me explain. So those 50 rate codes, so if we talk about the S code here, so this morning we're talking about S21, 22, 23. Within the S group, there are actually 7 industry rate codes. So 21, 22, and 23 are only 3 of the 7. So under the old model, if you had a long-term earning replacement or pension claim, as soon as the costs hit $90,000, we would take the difference between the total cost of the claim and the $90,000, and we would spread that among all employers in the S class. All 7 rate codes would share in the excess costs over that $90,000 cap, prorated on the basis of their payroll. So 3 things the actuary said. You should not just have a fixed cap. Secondly, it should not just be applied to pension claims. And thirdly, you need to spread the collective liability not at the class level, but at the overall board level. All 50 rate codes should be sharing in the collective liability, not just those that are in the S class in our example here this morning. So under the enhanced model, 2 changes, significant changes were made. Firstly, the $90,000, well, I guess 3. The $90,000 has now been replaced by 3 times the maximum ultimate wage rate. So in 2014, the government introduced legislation to increase the maximum wage rate. And over the last 5 years, we have been increasing the maximum insurable or maximum wage rate to get us to 165% of average industrial wage by 2019. So in 2014, the maximum insurable was $58,000. Today, it's over $84,000. So the maximum now will guide the amount of the claims cost cap. What the actuary determined and the board accepted is 3 times that cap is a much better balance. So at $84,000 roughly, the maximum, or the claims cost cap, I should say, is now at $252,500 and change. So if the claims costs exceed 200, so first thing that happens from a accountability perspective is industry rate codes are now accountable for all claims up to $252,000, as opposed to only pension costs at $90,000. So The first 252,000 will be absorbed by the industry rate code. The difference between 252,000 and whatever the total claims costs would be are now pooled at the board level and spread among all 50 rate codes on the basis of their claims costs, not payroll. So we've now indexed, if you will, the claims cost cap. It's tied now to the change in maximum insurable or maximum wage rate. We have applied it to all claims costs, not just pension costs, and we are now pooling that, spreading the collective liability among all 50 rate codes, not just the 7 in the S class. Next had to do with fatality costs. So under the old model, what we would do is we would take the 10-year average of fatality costs and we would charge every rate code, again on a pro rata basis, a fatality charge, whether or not that industry had a fatality or not within that 5-year period. Again, from an accountability perspective, the actuary said that's not very good. Why would industries who don't have fatalities bear the brunt of the total fatality costs? So the recommendation was the fatality costs ought to be charged to the industry rate code in which the fatality occurred, subject to the same claim cost cap as any other claim. So if a fatality cost exceeds $252,000, the industry will absorb, the industry that had the fatality will absorb the first $252,000 of that claim. The difference will then be spread among all 50 rate codes at the board level based on their proportionate share of total claims costs. Again, increasing accountability, but maintaining collective liability for those extremely expensive claims that may unduly burden an employer. With respect to our long-term claims, so one of the things we've heard from employers in the past, and by the way, employers said to us, the way you're dealing with fatalities isn't exactly fair. In essence, the actuary agreed, and so we've changed those various elements. Long-term claim costs. So under the existing model, again, we look at the average of the last 5 years of claim cost experience. So in setting 2018 premium rates, we would look at the most recent 5 fully completed years of claims experience. So we would be looking at 2016, 15, 14, 13, and 12. In 2012, we would take all costs associated with all claims paid in 2012. Some of those claims, in my previous example, could be up to 50 years old. And what the model would assume is that we would have a recurrence of that occurring at some point in the future. For 2013, we would take all claims paid in 2013, those costs associated with it, and again, assume that there would be a repeat based on the average of those 5 years. The actuary said, well, that's not really that reasonable in terms of predictability of future costs. You can't really assume that that is going to happen. In addition, it really slows down the reactivity of the model. If you're using 50-year-old experience and you continue to drag that 50-year-old experience forward, the model's not going to react very quickly to the most recent claim experience. So what the actuary recommended and what we've adopted in terms of the enhanced model is we will only take into account 7 years of claims costs in each of the claims experience years. So in my example, for 2012 to 2016, we would only take the cost paid in 2012 going back 7 years, not 50. Same thing with 13, 14, 15, and 16. We'd only look at the 7 years of activity. Now those costs that are spent beyond the 7 years are still real costs and have to be covered somehow through the premium. So what the actuary recommended and what we've adopted is all other costs that are older than 7 years within the claim year would be grouped together and again pooled and spread across all 50 industry codes on the basis of their proportionate claims costs. The last enhancement to the model has to do with the allocation of administration costs. So for years, what we've been assuming in the old model is that our administration costs are split 90%, 10% with respect to fixed and variable costs. So fixed costs are those costs that you would incur kind of regardless of the claim volume that you would have. So it's things like, keeping your lights on, the IT support systems, the HR support systems, the salaries of employees who are engaged not on the claim side, but in our finance activities, in our employer registration processes, those kinds of things. So those we would consider to be fixed costs, and what we assumed is that amounted to 10% of our total administrative spend. The other 90% were variable, related to claims activity, primarily made up of salaries of those employees who actually work on claims. When we actually looked, the actuary challenged us to actually look at what our admin spend looked like today. And what we determined was the split was actually 30% fixed and 70% variable. So under the old model, we would basically take 90% of our total administrative costs, consider them to be variable, and we would allocate that among employers on the basis of their claims activity or claims cost experience. The other 10% would be based on the payroll that was reported, because those are just our fixed costs. Under the enhanced model, we will do the same thing, except now we're only going to take 70% of our overall administrative costs, consider those to be variable, and spread those among all of the employers on the basis of their claims activity. The other portion, the 30%, would be considered to be fixed and would be spread among all employers on the basis of the payroll reported. So, for 2018, we have introduced a transition plan. Because there were 14 industry codes, the 3 of you here this morning with us, and 11 others that were negatively impacted by these enhancements to the model. And so what the board has offered and put in place was a transitionary measure to allow us to prepare for what might be coming in 2019. So for those industry codes that were seeing their premium rates increasing as a result of the enhancements to the model, the board is going to fund those transitionary costs out of the injury fund. So just out of our reserves, if you will. Those industries who see their premium rates stay the same or actually decrease will actually get what the new or enhanced model would produce. Starting in 2019, all industry premiums will be determined on the basis of the enhanced model. There will no longer be a transitionary measure taken. So, a couple of examples here. So if we have an industry rate code that would see increases in both the old model and enhanced model. So what's here on the your far left is the 2017 premium rate. So it was in this particular example, the premium rate was $1. Applying the enhanced model would require a premium rate of $1.30. If we had not enhanced the model and continued with the old model, that industry code would have seen their rate increase anyway, but to $1.20. And so what we would do is we would take the difference between the $1.30 and the $1.20. This would become the final rate. And we take the difference between the $1.30 and the $1.20 and apply that against the payroll of the industry and simply take that money out of the industry fund to cover that shortfall. In cases where there's an increase under the enhanced model or no change and a decrease in the old model. So in this example, premium rate's $1. The enhanced model actually called for a premium increase of $1.05. But when we ran the old model, it actually called for a decrease to around 89 cents. Based on the consultation around the transition, employers said to us, don't take us down to 89 cents and then in 2019 take us all the way up to $1.05, just hold our rate where it is. So in this example, instead of dropping the rate based on what the old model would have calculated, we're simply holding the rate at the 2017 level. So, as I already said, the differences between the 2018 premium rates under the old model versus the enhanced model are going to be funded through the injury fund in most cases, unless the enhanced model resulted in a decrease. The 2019 premium rates, however, will be solely calculated on the basis of the enhanced model, updated for whatever experience there is. So when we look at the industry code S21, excuse me, which is Community and Social Services. Just got to find my notes here to provide the explanations. So you'll see the various elements of the enhanced model. So here's the change to the credibility and the impact that it had on this premium rate. Here's the change in the indicators, claims cost pooling, fatalities, etc. So on the credibility side, so under the old model, the rate was $1. The enhanced model called for $1.08. So we have, what we would do is we would hold that rate at $1 and we would take that 8 cents out of the injury fund. So what in the credibility piece actually led to that penny increase for the S21 code? It's primarily the result of moving from using 3 years of medical cost averaging compared to 5 years of medical cost. So remember, part of the review, the credibility piece, was the actuary said you should not differentiate between benefit types. Use 5-year averaging for all benefit types, including medical aid. So by grabbing 5 years of medical aid, it actually resulted in a 1 cent increase in the premium rate. In the change in indicators, so this is getting rid of the blending of the premium rates, averaging the premium rates between the last 2 years, as well as using workforce as opposed to injuries as the predictor. That resulted, the net result of that was a decrease in the premium rate of 5 cents, primarily related to removing the averaging provision that was in the old model. In claims cost pooling, so again, this is setting the maximum claims costs at $252,000, and then charging the balance of that to all industry rate codes on the basis of their claims experience. As a result of putting in that cap, the claims cost pooling resulted in a 2 cent decrease. So the average pension costs in S21 were actually 75% higher than the average of the entire S sector. So remember, under the old model, we would pool at the class level. So those 7 rate codes would share any cost in excess of $90,000. S21 benefited from that in a very small way because most of their long-term earning replacement or pension costs were less than $90,000. What they were doing, though, is picking up the pooling associated with the other 6 rate codes. So the other 6 rate codes had pension costs as well. In effect, what S21 was doing was subsidizing those other rate codes within the S class for pension costs in excess of $90,000. Removing that and applying the cost in excess of 3 times the maximum actually had the positive impact of reducing rates by 2 cents. On the fatality side, although over the last 5-year period, the S21 did have 1 fatality, changing the fatality provisions had no effect on their premium rates. The 2 big changes to S21 actually occurred as a result of long-term claims and the change in the allocation of administrative costs. So long-term claims, again, was cutting off the claim experience to the most recent 7 years in that 5 or 10-year averaging period and using that to predict future costs. As a result of doing that, S21 see an increase of 10 cents in their premium rate. which means that the experience, the claims experience they had beyond the 7-year period was lower than the claim experience in the 7-year period. So when we took all 50 years of claim costs together and averaged that produced a lower average than just using 7 years. So again, an impact of the accountability and reactivity of the model to more recent claim experience as opposed to old experience has resulted in the premium increase. On the administration side, industries that have relatively low claims costs, relatively high payroll, will see, generally speaking, see their premium rate increase because the fixed component increased from 10 to 30%. So you're still getting that allocated on the basis of your payroll, but the percentage of claims, of administrative costs, has increased from 10 to 30%. So you're picking up the same proportion of a larger pool. The variable cost, on the other hand, is a smaller proportion, but you're going to be picking that up on the basis of your claim experience. So all of these things combined, the 2017 rate for S21, which is Community and Social Services, was $1.03. The old model would have produced a rate of $1. The enhanced model would have produced a rate of $1.08. The final rate was $1.03, maintaining the 2017 rate, so not reducing that rate from $1.03 to $1. The difference of this 5 cents between what the model would have produced and what the transition rate is will be covered by the board simply by taking that shortfall out of the injury fund. S22 is our restaurants, catering, and our dry cleaning businesses. So the impact of the enhanced model on S22 is as follows. The credibility really had no impact on that particular industry code. Generally speaking, S22's experience was worse than the overall board level, so blending the board experience with that industry experience, they were only 68% credible under the old model. They're 91% credible under the new model. The combination of removing the benefit of being blended at the board rate because their costs were higher than the average at the board rate, with holding them more accountable for their own costs based on 91% credibility, the two of them netted out and there really was no net effect on S22 as a result of that change. The change in indicators, again, removing the averaging of the premium rates predominantly resulted in the drop of 6 cents in the premium rate. On the claims cost pooling side, the average pension costs within S22 were 83% higher than the pension cost average for the entire S class. So they benefited, they benefited quite substantially from the old claims cost pooling. And as a result of the removal of that and holding them more accountable for their own costs at $252,000 resulted in a 4 cent increase in the premium rate. On the fatality side, again, this industry code had 3 fatalities in its 5 and 10 year experience. But as a result of the change in the claim cost capping and the application of the principle of holding industries who have the fatalities more accountable, actually saw a net decrease of 3 cents. On the long-term claims, similar story to S21. Their most recent experience was more significant than their older experience. So the average of costs in the older than 7-year cost categories was less than their 7-year cost experience. The model's reacting to more recent experience, resulting in an increase of 8 cents. Similarly, on the administrative side, with the change from 10% fixed to 30% fixed, resulted in a 3 cent increase in the premium rate. So for S22, their 2017 rate was 82 cents. If we'd stuck with the old model, it would have gone to 83 cents. The enhanced model called for a premium rate of 89 cents. The 2018 final rate was set at 83 cents, holding it at their 2007 and their 2018 rate calculated under the old model, and the difference of this 6 cents would be covered again simply by taking that shortfall out of the injury fund. For S23, which are hotels, motels, taxis, limousine services, similar story. The change in credibility had no impact on this particular rate code. S23 was 61% credible under the old model, 84% credible under the new. The net effect of all the changes had no impact. The change in the indicators, the removal of the rate averaging resulted in the 1 cent net decrease. The claims cost pooling, S23's average pension costs were 236% higher than the average of the pension costs in the entire S class. So again, they benefited significantly from the claims cost pooling at the S code, increasing that maximum from 90,000 to 252,000, caused the industry to absorb a greater portion of their own claims costs, which resulted in an increase of 4 cents. On the fatality side, similar story. 1 cent decrease. There were no fatalities in this particular rate code over the review period. The net result being a 1 cent decrease. On the long-term claims, same story as the other two rate codes, applying 7 years of cost experience over the last 5 and 10 years. Was worse than applying the claims cost experience of very, very old claims that were going into that average. And so recent experience would call for a 14 cent increase in the premium rate for S23. On the administrative side, the changes in the administrative element really had no impact on this particular rate code. So the combination of reducing the variable component and increasing the fixed one netted each other out, and there was no impact. The 2017 premium rate for S23 was $1.49. If we'd stuck with the existing model, the old model, it would have been $1.52. The new model would require $1.68. Again, for transition purposes, the final rate set for 2018 was to hold the rate at the $1.52, which is what the old model would have produced. The 16 cent difference, similar to the other rate codes we've talked about this morning, would see that shortfall simply funded out of the injury fund. So what might this mean going forward? Well, under the assumption that everything stays the same, so we would have no change in payroll, we have no change in claim experience, which is highly unlikely. These industries, S21, 22, and 23, would start 2019 with the premium rate that would have been in place had we introduced the enhanced model in 2018 without the transition. So without any changes in experience, in claim experience, without any changes in payroll, S21 would have a rate of $1.08, S22 of 89 cents, and S23 would move to $1.68. Now, should experience improve, should payroll change significantly, such that the model is positively impacted with respect to future claims costs, we could see a mitigation in this. On the other hand, if injury experience is worsened, so what happens from setting 2019 rates is we drop off 2013 as a claim experience year and we pick up 2017. So if 2017 claim experience is worse than the 2012, it's likely that average is going to increase, which would have a detrimental effect on these premium rates. So again, this is just a for instance. What is certain, if with no changes to payroll and premium rates, the industry premium rates for these three rate codes would be $1.08, 89 cents, and $1.68 for 2019. So what's next? This presentation has been recorded, will be posted within the next week or so, next couple of days on our website. Again, for those who weren't able to join us here this morning or online to review at their leisure. Happy to take questions in a couple of minutes, but if there are more questions that occur to you after you get back home to your place of business, feel free to email those at askwcb@wcbsask.com, and we will respond to those questions within the week of your submission. In October 2018, once again, as we have for the last, for all the years that I've been here, which is 23, we will be holding our fall rate setting consultation meetings, and we'll be presenting the 2019 preliminary premium rates based on the enhanced model. Of course, I'd be remiss in not reminding us that we do have ways in which we can influence our premium rates, and that is to focus on two things: the prevention of injuries, the elimination of injuries by following our Mission Zero mantra, and in the event that we have the misfortune of having one of our colleagues injured at work, ensuring that we have programs and policies in place to quickly recover those individuals and bring them back into the workplace to mitigate the costs. I think I can emphasize enough today that the enhanced model, while it is critically important, by no means are we backing away from our commitment and need to achieve Mission Zero. It is critically important to prevent injuries. One injury is one too many, one fatality is one too many. But the enhanced model is paying more particular attention to the actual cost of claims than it is the frequency of injury. However, the least expensive injury is the one that never happens. So again, we would encourage, through the help of, if you have industry-based safety associations, through WorkSafe and other things that we can provide through the WCB, assist you in injury prevention initiatives, as well as assisting you in developing effective return to work programs. I would now entertain any questions, either that have been submitted online or from those of you here present with us today. Those of you here with us today, I would ask that you use the floor mic simply so that your question and the answer can be recorded for the benefit of those who are joining us online. So please.
Well, it's good to be back, Peter.
Morning, Jim.
So for us, of course, we've got some questions with regards to how it's impacted the S22 and the S23. We do have members that are in that code as well. For us, S23 payroll is up 4.5%, so it was good to hear your explanation as to how it is that increases in payroll, really that's not part of the calculation anymore, right?
No, the payroll still plays a critical piece because it's the denominator in the calculation of the premium rate. So if claim cost experience stays flat and the payroll increases by 4.5%, you're going to actually see a reduction in the premium rate. So payroll also, in terms of allocation of the fixed costs relative to the administrative component, payroll plays a significant role in that as well.
Good to know. Injuries for us were down 16.5%. Total costs are down 47%. And in S23 in particular, we're projecting the lowest total costs, $1.2 million in over 11 years. So when we talk about credibility, now I understand what that means between the 5 and the 7, but it would seem that in cases like ours, there could be consideration for how it is that we've been performing, particularly over the last 10 years. I think when we're talking about trending, I think it's pretty clear that we've made some great strides.
So with the move to the 7 versus the 50 years, in the long-term claims, those kinds of results are going to show up in the premium rate far more quickly than they have in the past, because they're not going to be masked by old claims costs that would have been lingering just because you've got a long-term claim sitting in that tail. So to the extent that experience improves, it's still going to take you, I forgot what I said, 91%, I think S23 is 91% credible. So 91% of your experience is going to be based on the last 5 years. Only 9% is going to come from your experience over the remaining 5 years to make up the full 10-year block. So the model will react far more quickly, and you should see that, quicker than you would have in the past in terms of reflecting in your premium rate. The second thing is, like 2 points, I guess, that I would like to make. These 6 enhancements, like the principles of collective liability and accountability, reactivity, and rate stability, we can't cherry pick. We can't say, well, we like the change, the enhancement that's made to the fatalities, but we don't like the change that's made in claims cost pooling, just by way of example. All of them have to work together in order to create what our actuary consider to be the more credible rate-making model, the one that better predicts costs, enhances and balances collective liability with the accountability piece, and balances reactivity with rate stability. Secondly, the model has to apply to all industries. So we can't say for S23 we're going to do this, but for B11 we're going to do something different. It's just going to be a matter of having the model work through your claim experience and have it reflect that in a far more fair and balanced and quick way than what the old model was doing. Of course, the thing I didn't talk about this morning was the experience rating piece as well. So individual employers whose current experience is better than the average for their industry are going to see discounts in addition to whatever the model is generating.
All right, so again, it seems to be less complicated than before, but the net impact to the S23 is dramatic. When you had mentioned in one of the slides that there's a significant benefit. I think it was of 4 cents. But then the word significant wasn't used when it was 14 cents that was going to be applied to the negative to us.
Oh, that's a significant increase.
Sure. Okay. And you answered many of the questions that I did have, so I appreciate that. So in our estimation, you had just said that the current rate model, or the enhanced rate model that we have, is more reactive than the old one?
Yes.
That one I didn't see, because in our estimation, it looks like it's actually less reactive than the old model.
So one of with the actuary discovered one of the flaws in the old model. So when we only calculated 5 years of claims experience. So we would look at the 5 years of experience and average that and use that to predict the future. But in each of those 5 years, we would include all claims costs regardless of the year of injury. So if in your claims cost experience, and I don't know this to be the case in S23, but if your claims cost experience in 2015, just by way of example, you had a claim that was 30 years old, that had $200,000 in costs associated with it, we would include that $200,000 in the average for 2015.
Okay.
And so if you made improvements in 2016, they wouldn't show up because those improvements are being hidden by that average coming in from that 30-year-old claim in 2015. Under the enhanced model, we're only looking at the last 7 years of claims cost experience. So that $200,000 that's there is no longer going to mute your most current experience. It's going to be out of the way. And so the model will reflect within the rate code far more closely the current experience than the old one would. It's far more reactive because we're not bringing old experience in to hide what's currently happening.
Okay, well that's important for me, because I've got to try to sell this to my membership when they look at these pieces. I've had 2 very interesting meetings over this, and having an understanding that it would indeed be more reactive is something that we've been calling for a long time. So, okay, I didn't see that piece. What is the average cost of a fatality?
Anybody know that? I don't know offhand. $250,000 roughly, I'm told.
I thought it was much higher. Okay. All things considered, okay. When it comes to spreading the cost at the board level, my understanding of the Act and the Levy of Assessment 134.1, isn't it pretty clear that we shouldn't be spreading costs out amongst all rate codes? The way I'm looking at this, we're hitting mission 0. We didn't have any fatalities. And yet, from what I'm seeing, is that we are bearing the brunt of all those industries out there that have really long-term claims costs, big ones. They have fatalities. And yet, we're paying the same as we would as if they happened in our own industry. So why does it seems to me that the practice that we have now really it's not compliant with the Act. And we've talked about this in the past.
You know, I don't know 134 off the top of my head, obviously you have it in front of you, but essentially what the Act says is the board can decide how it divides up the industries, and the board can decide how it actually calculates the premium rates.
Within that code, within the industrial undertaking.
No, at the overall board level. So the first thing that the Act says is the board has one injury fund. And that injury fund can be divided up and covered whatever which way the board so chooses. And within that, decide how, based on the industry experience, how it wants to set the premium rates. So the board grants the board the Act grants our board full discretion to determine all matters within our legislation, including how it sets premium rates. If we weren't doing pooling at the board level, I can tell you that S23, based on its maximum claims costs, would be worse off than pooling those costs at the board level. If you remember, I said S23's average pension costs were 236% higher than the average for the entire S pool.
Sure.
So what that meant in the past is the other 6 rate codes within the S code were picking up S23's pension costs in excess of $90,000.
Sure.
And picking up a portion of that. So effectively subsidizing the S23.
Sure.
Those costs are now going up to the overall board level, to all 50 rate codes, and the impact of that is now being mitigated. Are you picking up other industries? Absolutely. But in exchange for that, they're picking up a portion of yours.
And my challenge to that is the percentage of that portion. When we look at the S code in its entirety, the 6 very low instances of claims, fatalities, those kinds of, those things that really impact premiums. When you look at other industries and you take, and I'm not going to pick one specifically, that does have many injuries, lots of long-term claims and fatalities, that percentage of what we're picking up on their part, I would say, is disproportionately unfair. This is where the S code is at, and particularly in industries in which it's pretty sedentary, not a lot of travel even. I think that we're picking up an incredible amount of other, if those were simply allocated, if, in the way I read the Act, if in which the industry, the fatality long-term claims costs sit and stay there and they're not pooled, I think that you'd see significant decrease. If an industry has lots of injuries and lots of fatalities and they had to pick that all up, I think you'd see significant change in the way that they had safety.
The enhancement to this model, Jim, is going to do exactly what you just said. So fatalities, while the average cost might be $250,000, we would have potentially a few that are higher than $250,000. But I would venture to guess, I'm just thinking about the fatalities last year, if we have a very young person with dependents, that can be a $500,000 claim. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of those, though. The majority of them are going to fall within the maximum claims cost cap of $252,000. Which means that industry 100% is going to take 100% of the fatality costs. In the rare event that a claim occurs or several claims occur that drive the costs up above the $252,000, all industries would share because that's part of the collective liability principle. The claims cost pooling holds industry more accountable for their most recent experience. The long-term claims does the same thing. All of these things, I appreciate that transitioning from the old to new has a significant impact, particularly on S23. You're going to $1.68. But the model itself, I don't know if anybody has that here this morning, but I can get it to you. If we had implemented the enhanced model in 2017, what would the rate be for 2017? And compare that to what the rate would be in 2018. Gabriel,
I think you did run the numbers.
Do you happen to have that? 162. So if we had implemented the enhanced model in 2017, the rate would have gone to $1.62 instead of, Gabriel, what was it? I guess I can go back. So for S23, if we had implemented this enhanced model in 2017, that rate would have gone to $1.62 instead of $1.49. There obviously has been some mitigation that's occurred because it only went to $1.52. Applying it now to $1.68, so regardless, Jim, there has been between 2017 and 2018, so which would be between 2015 and 2016, there's been a deterioration in the experience someplace in S23 that would cause the rate to go from $1.62 to $1.68. That could be because it's more reactive. I don't know what the factors would be. We would have to dig into that. But if your costs are down $1.5 million or whatever it is you said, I can't say that in 2019 you're going to see that immediately show up. Was that for 2017?
Yeah, I believe so.
So 2017 is now going to come into play in setting the 2019 premium rate, and we're going to drop 2013 off. So if that's better, if 2017 is better than 2013 was, you're going to see a positive impact on your 19 premium rate.
And that's really where the challenge becomes, is what is 2019 and where does this plateau? If we're going to continue to see 14-cent increases over this time, and you can appreciate that there's a transition period here, but what does that trajectory look like, for us? And
who would, until we see the experience, Jim, we don't know. Like, we won't, in October of 18, October of this year, we'll presenting what the preliminary rates are, and at that point in time, we'll know what we're seeing in terms of 2019. But I can't even guess today.
Okay. One of the things that we're hoping for, because we in the past when we had consultation sessions, we felt that they were more like educational sessions, and there really wasn't a lot of, even though there was lots of feedback, it didn't really have an impact. And we're hoping that at some point that there can be some discussions as to how this, my challenge is that our industry has done everything that's been asked of them. We've really done, I think, a good job over the last 6 years in getting to our employers, making sure that they understand the importance of safety, hitting mission zero. So when we're there, when we're doing that, and in every e-blast that we send out, we congratulate employers only to have this happen, I'm sure you can appreciate how hard to sell it. I've got employers that are saying, why am I even bothering with this? What's the benefit? And I get into the philosophy of saying, oh, it's good for our employees. But they're not buying it. They're business people, and they're really frustrated with this. And when they can see that out of the 50, there's 6, I think, that have increases, and yet again, we're on the sort of taking it in the chops again. This becomes a difficult sell. So, and again, it's perception. People, when they, to your point, when you talk about home and vehicle insurance, they understand that. If they don't get into accidents, their premiums go down. And yet every message we send out. Well, in my case.
They'll get, so my experience is I get a rebate, which is generated out of the experience rating piece, but my base premium doesn't go down.
Well, I guess the idea is, the perception is that if in the insurance world, if you do really good, if you don't get into accidents and those types of things, you can keep your premiums low, right?
That's true here too.
Well,
at the individual employer level.
Sure.
Now, 90% of industries we hear from, Jim, would tell us exactly the same thing you told us. Is the industry doing good? Why isn't my premium rate lower? Because it's the correlation between number of injuries and claims costs no longer exists. Claims are dropping off, which means the least expensive claims are the ones that are being prevented, and the really expensive claims are the ones that remain in the system. So costs are going up like this, while injuries are going down. So we haven't released this yet, but let me tell you, for 2017, we're seeing total claims costs go down. Total claims go down. Mm-hmm. We're not seeing a corresponding decrease in claims costs.
And is that back to the medical costs again?
Well, it's medical. It's increasing. The maximum is now indexed. So in 2016, I'll be wrong on this, but it'd be in the ballpark. Our maximum insurable was in the $78,000 range. It's now $84,000. Mm-hmm. So that could be generating additional claims costs. And the propensity, the extent to which workers stay on comp longer because they haven't gone back to work, is increasing. Durations are increasing, an indication of increasing severity. It's those things. So it's the prevention is critical. Where we focus our efforts, and WorkSafe's going through significant strategic planning session right now to see if we need to adjust our strategy. Because our targeting strategy, I think we've picked the low-hanging fruit in terms of the simple, not very expensive injuries, we need to now target a little bit differently maybe and a little bit more, and we'll be out talking to our customers about that as well. So it's not just about the number of claims, it's the cost associated with those claims that really is what's critical in terms of premium rates. Because again, what we're doing in establishing the premium rate is trying to collect sufficient revenue to pay for current and all future costs associated with the claim. We're not using number of claims anymore to try and figure that out, because that led us down the wrong path, caused us to intervene in ways that didn't create credibility in the model itself.
Okay. Well, I think that if there's one piece of advice you can give me, then what's the soundbite I can take back to my membership?
Focusing on injury prevention continues to be critical. That combined with effective return to work programs to mitigate the costs is the second piece that's critical, right? It's still frequency and duration that are two primary drivers of claims costs. And so to the extent that we can impact injuries and the extent that we can impact durations, the lower our costs are going to be, and that'll show up in our model.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what we've been saying for the last 8 years, 6 days, particularly the last 6 years.
So, I mean, something's going on, Jim. I mean, I haven't dove into any of the specific claims in your industry or any industry for that matter to determine what's happening with respect to propensity, what's happening to average claims costs. But, we can certainly provide that. The other thing I would offer up is for you like us to come to your board, to a board meeting or some other venue where we can address your membership. We'd be happy to do that and do our level best to try and explain this as clearly and simply as we can.
Sure.
Yeah, there's no question. We're not saying industry is not doing its job. We're simply saying the combination of what we're seeing in terms of increased claims costs and whatever the payroll base is causing the premium rate to increase.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I had some other questions, but they weren't related to rates, and I'm not sure that this is the...
Is there anything online just to try and, not kind of monopolize the entire
All right, well,
time
thank
here,
you.
but thank you, Jim. Nothing online? Any other questions from the floor? Not seeing any. Again, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in online as well as attending here this morning. And those of you traveling at all today, please be careful out there. I understand there might be freezing rain in certain areas of our province. We don't need any more incidents or fatalities, whether they're work-related or not. So please do have a safe day. And of course, my wife would be disappointed in me if I didn't wish you and your loved ones a very happy Valentine's Day. Thanks for coming.